The morning everything collapsed, I woke up believing it would be just another ordinary day, the kind where the sun rises slowly and life moves quietly, even if something inside you feels slightly off. I remember stretching my hand across the bed, touching only cold sheets where warmth used to be, and brushing it off as another sign of distance I kept pretending wasn't growing. The air felt heavy, like a warning, though I didn't know yet that my life was about to split open without mercy. The phone rang, sharp, insistent, vibrating with a kind of urgency that already made my heart sink before I even answered. A woman's voice told me my bank account was overdrawn and the mortgage payment had bounced. I almost laughed because it sounded so absurd. I had paid it. I always paid it. But the laugh died in my throat when she said, gently but firmly, "Ma'am, you haven't made a payment in 3 months." My heartbeat turned hollow. 3 months. My mind raced through memories of conversations with my husband. His reassurances, his calm voice telling me everything was fine, his constant, almost controlling reminders that he would handle it. He didn't just lie. He let me drown without telling me the water was rising. My hands trembled as I hung up and opened my laptop. The login screen felt like the edge of a cliff, and the moment the account page loaded, it felt as if someone pushed me off. Withdrawal after withdrawal. Transfers. Empty savings. Credit maxed out. Thousands missing. The financial equivalent of a massacre, all authorized under his name. I stared, unable to blink, unable to breathe properly because it wasn't just money I was looking at. These numbers represented my trust, my stability, my future, every hour I had worked, every sacrifice I had made. I whispered, no, this can't be real, even though the evidence was blinding. Betrayal doesn't hit like a slap. It spreads through you like poison, quietly and thoroughly, until suddenly it reaches your heart and you collapse. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The house was silent except for the frantic beats of my own panic, echoing louder and louder as I paced the living room, holding my breath, waiting for answers that I already feared. He came home that evening with the same casual stride he always had, like the world owed him comfort. When I confronted him, shaking, furious, terrified, he didn't deny anything. He didn't apologize. He just stared at me with cold, tired eyes and shrugged like losing our home, draining our accounts, and lying to my face was an inconvenience, not destruction. "You worry too much," he said. "Money isn't that serious." I felt something break inside me because money wasn't the point. Trust was. Stability was. Partnership was. All the nights I stayed up working late, all the bills I organized, all the dreams we talked about, they weren't real to him. They were weights, burdens he didn't want to carry anymore. When I told him he had ruined everything, he didn't flinch. He simply sat down, rubbed his forehead and muttered, "I don't love you anymore. Honestly, I haven't in a long time." The world didn't just tilt. It completely disappeared. That sentence pierced deeper than any financial loss because money could be recovered. But love, once dead, turns into a ghost that haunts every memory. He packed a bag with the same calmness someone uses when preparing for a weekend trip, not when abandoning a marriage. I begged for an explanation, a conversation, even a moment of honesty, anything, but he only sighed as if I was the one causing trouble. When he walked out the door without looking back, it felt as though the house itself exhaled a cold, heavy final breath. The silence that replaced him wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, loud, almost physical. I sank to the floor, staring at the front door he closed behind him, and finally, the tears I had been holding back since morning broke free. They didn't fall lightly, they poured. Grief mixed with confusion, betrayal mixed with humiliation, fear tangled with disbelief. I wasn't just losing a husband, I was losing everything. My home, my financial stability, my sense of safety, my plans for the future, even my identity as someone's partner. I was facing the ruins of a life I had worked years to build, now crumbled in a single day. That first night alone felt like standing inside a collapsing building, every wall falling inward while I had nothing to shield myself with except shaking hands and a breaking heart. I sat on the floor for hours, surrounded by bills, overdue notices I never saw before, and the heavy knowledge that I had been living beside a stranger. My phone buzzed relentlessly, banks, lenders, alerts, but I was too numb to answer any of them. I kept replaying the moment he said he didn't love me, how he said it with no hesitation, as if the words had been sitting on his tongue for months, waiting for the right moment to shatter me. It made me question everything. Did he ever love me at all? Were the late nights he claimed were work spent with someone else? Did he laugh behind my back while lying to my face? I wanted answers, but he had left me with silence instead, and silence can be the cruelest truth. Sleep didn't come. My mind paced as frantically as my feet did earlier. Every sound in the house, pipes groaning, wind brushing against windows, the hum of the refrigerator, felt like something breaking, something falling apart. Around 3 a.m. I finally stood up, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and walked through every room slowly, touching surfaces like I was trying to memorize a life that no longer belonged to me. In the living room I found the travel brochure he once brought home, saying we'd go one day. Maybe that day was never meant for both of us. In the bedroom I stared at the space where his clothes once hung, now empty, as if he had never lived there at all. It hit me then that heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietness of an empty closet, the stillness of a room suddenly too big, the soft echo of memories that don't feel like they belong anymore. The next morning I faced reality, not because I was ready but because denial had run out of room to hide. The foreclosure notice stuck to the front door felt like a punch. A neighbor walking by stared with pity before pretending not to see me. Shame wrapped around me like a second skin. Inside I forced myself to call the bank again. The representative spoke kindly, but kindness doesn't fix numbers and numbers don't lie. We were 3 months behind, penalties had added up, and unless I paid a large amount immediately the process would continue. I didn't have the money. I didn't even have enough to stabilize a fraction of the damage he left behind. My voice nearly cracked as I thanked the representative for their time, even though all I wanted to do was scream that it wasn't fair, that I didn't deserve this, that I had worked too hard to lose everything because of someone else's choices. For the next few days I tried to hold everything together, clinging to whatever scraps of hope I could find. I searched for documents, passwords, financial records, anything that could help, but it felt like sweeping broken glass with bare hands. Every new discovery cut deeper. There were loans I never knew existed, accounts tied to his name but draining mine, messages between him and someone else where he called me naive for trusting him. That one hurt more than the financial ruin. I wasn't naive. I was loving, loyal, blind in the way people are when they believe they are building a future together. By the end of the week, the house felt like a museum of lies. I couldn't breathe in it anymore. The day I finally packed a small suitcase and left, it wasn't a dramatic decision. It was survival. I didn't have a plan, I barely had money. But staying meant drowning in memories and debt and betrayal. So I walked out with clothes, a few photos, my laptop, and a heart torn so violently it felt stitched only by willpower. I drove to the cheapest motel on the edge of town, where the wallpaper peeled and the carpets smelled like old cigarettes, but at least the walls didn't whisper reminders of him. I cried again that night, not delicate tears but raw, wild sobs that came from the deepest parts of me. Grief is exhausting, but rebuilding doesn't begin until grief empties you enough to make space for what's next. At least that's what I told myself as I held a pillow to my chest, hoping the loneliness wouldn't swallow me whole. Days blurred together in the motel room. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, a rhythm too slow for my restless mind. I made small, deliberate routines. Coffee from the vending machine, a short walk down cracked sidewalks, checking my email obsessively for any sign of stability. But mostly there were bills, reminders, and an occasional marketing email promising a fresh start that felt cruelly ironic. I spoke to no one, answered no calls, letting the world exist outside my little rented cell. It was safer that way. People brought expectations, questions, pity, things I couldn't bear yet. At night, when the fluorescent light buzzed and shadows crept across the thin walls, I faced my own thoughts. I asked myself over and over, how did it come to this? How had I not seen the cracks widening beneath us? The truth was painful. Love can blind you to the slow erosion of trust. And betrayal has a way of sneaking in quietly, disguised as everyday life, until one day you wake up in a stranger's home and realize the person you loved has been an enigma all along. I started writing everything down, not because I intended to share it but because I had to externalize it. Grief, I realized, needed a vessel. Words became my anchor. I chronicled the deception, the moments of doubt, the nights when my body ached from anxiety and loneliness. I wrote of the financial chaos, the humiliation, the despair. Each paragraph was a small exorcism, a way to tell the chaos you will not win. By the end of the first week, my phone started buzzing again. Not with bills but with messages from friends I hadn't reached out to. I ignored them at first. Shame and pride tangled into a knot so tight I couldn't untangle. But eventually one friend's persistence broke through. She didn't ask for details or explanations. She simply said, "You're not alone. Come talk to me." And for the first time in days I let someone in. We met at a coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and the faint sweetness of pastries. I spoke little, mostly listening to the comforting hum of the world outside my grief. She didn't try to fix me, didn't offer cliches. She just sat there, and somehow that was enough. Small victories began to appear. I found a temp job that barely covered the motel room and my meals, but it was a foothold. I sorted through my finances, cataloging debts, freezing unnecessary accounts, prioritizing what I could handle. It was tedious, frightening, and painfully slow, but every completed task felt like a stitch closing a tear in my life. Nights remained hard. Sometimes I'd wake from dreams where he was there, smiling, acting like nothing had happened. I'd wake with my chest tight, heart racing, hands clutching the bedsheet as if it could shield me from the past. But slowly, those dreams began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of self-possession. I realized that heartbreak, while devastating, is also a teacher. It teaches boundaries, resilience, and the painful but necessary lesson that some people are incapable of what we seek from them. And that realization, as brutal as it felt, carried a strange kind of freedom. I began imagining a life rebuilt. A tiny apartment of my own, my name on the lease, walls I could paint whatever color I wanted, mornings where I could wake up without the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. The idea was tentative, fragile, almost laughable, but it was mine. And slowly, inch by inch, that fragile vision grew teeth, claws, and roots, grounding me in the truth that survival is not just about enduring. It's about reclaiming what was stolen and redefining what home means. By the second week in the motel, I realized that grief wasn't a straight line. Some days I could eat breakfast, shower, and even joke lightly with the receptionist about the peeling wallpaper. Other days, I'd lie on the lumpy bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, as if my body remembered the betrayal before my mind could even process it. The oscillation between functioning and collapsing was exhausting. I wondered if this, too, was part of the punishment life had decided to impose, teaching you patience, endurance, humility, and a stark understanding that healing is neither clean nor linear. One evening, after a long day at the temp job that left my feet blistered and my mind fried, I walked to a small convenience store. The sun was just dipping behind distant rooftops, painting the sky a bruised purple. I bought a notebook, cheap pens, and a pack of instant noodles, my new staples. On a whim, I began writing letters to him. Not to send, not to share, but to pour every ounce of rage, heartbreak, and confusion onto paper. I called them unsent letters. I wrote about the betrayal, the lies, the dreams he had stolen from me. I wrote about the numb mornings and the nights of raw, uncontrollable sobs. I wrote about the despair and the moments when I questioned my own worth. By the fifth letter, my hand ached, but my chest felt slightly lighter. The process of documenting my life, piece by piece, began to have an unintended side effect. I started noticing the small things I had lost sight of. The way sunlight touched the motel walls in the morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the rhythm of city streets as people hurried home from work. Ordinary life, mundane life, seemed almost miraculous when it wasn't tainted by betrayal. I realized that while I couldn't undo the past, I could begin to cultivate a present that belonged entirely to me. Phone calls from creditors continued, each one a reminder that I was standing on the edge of ruin. I answered them more often now, with a new kind of cautious clarity. I learned to negotiate, to ask questions, to understand where the most critical pressure points were. Some calls ended in temporary relief, some in the harsh reminder that I would have to do more, earn more, plan more. And each time I felt a tiny surge of empowerment. Survival, I realized, was also about reclaiming agency over a life that had been hijacked. One rainy afternoon, I sat in the motel parking lot, watching water puddle and ripple around the tires of parked cars. I reflected on the person I had been, the trusting, hopeful version of myself who had given so much to someone undeserving, and the person I was becoming, wary, strong, deliberate, and fiercely protective of the fragile core of self I still owned. Pain had done something strange. It had stripped me to rawness, but in that rawness I found the first sparks of authenticity. I had no choice but to rebuild from scratch, and that thought, frightening as it was, thrilled me as much as it terrified me. I also began reconnecting slowly with people I had distanced during the marriage. Old friends, family members I hadn't seen in months, even casual acquaintances. I didn't seek sympathy and I didn't hide my pain, but I allowed myself to be seen in a way I hadn't allowed in years. The simple act of being visible, of letting someone witness my vulnerability, became an anchor in the storm. It reminded me that while my home was gone, my life, and my relationships, still existed. By the third week, the first real sense of rhythm returned. I had mapped out a plan. Focus on work, handle the most urgent financial matters, start saving, and begin searching for a permanent place to live. Each small accomplishment, paying one overdue bill, filing a necessary form, organizing my meager belongings, felt like a victory. I celebrated in quiet, small ways. A long shower, a cup of tea, a notebook entry that didn't feel like anger but like hope. I began to sense that heartbreak, while a violent teacher, was also a gatekeeper. Beyond it lay resilience, self-knowledge, and a life rebuilt with intention rather than complacency. Evenings remained the hardest. Shadows lengthened and memories crept in like uninvited guests. But now, instead of drowning in them, I confronted them. I allowed myself to feel the sting, acknowledge the loss, and then return to the practical. Arranging finances, planning meals, writing another letter that I would never send. Slowly, the raw edge dulled just enough that I could function without feeling entirely consumed. One night, lying in the motel bed, I realized I hadn't cried in hours. I hadn't laughed either, but I felt steady. Tentative, fragile, yes, but steady. And in that steadiness, I found the first hint of a truth I hadn't allowed myself to consider. I might not just survive this. I might emerge from it different, yes, but stronger, more careful, and with a clearer sense of who I was and what I deserved. The night was still long and the road ahead daunting, but for the first time in what felt like months, I could imagine the sunrise as something other than a reminder of loss. By the fourth week, the novelty of survival had worn off, leaving only the raw, grinding work of existence. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss I hadn't chosen to stand above. The motel walls, once a haven, began to feel like a cage. I longed for my own space, for walls that belonged to me, where no memory of him lingered like an unwanted ghost. But renting an apartment required deposits I didn't have, references I couldn't provide, and credit I had no hope of repairing quickly. So I stayed, each day counting pennies and worrying over bills that multiplied like weeds in a neglected garden. My job, though steady, barely covered rent and food. I worked long hours, often coming home to the hum of the fluorescent motel lights and the lingering scent of stale coffee and cigarettes. Exhaustion weighed on me in waves, sometimes crushing, sometimes dulling the edges of grief just enough to survive. I learned to cherish the small, ordinary victories. A hot meal, a day without tears, a conversation with a friend that didn't revolve around my heartbreak. These moments became the scaffolding upon which I slowly began to rebuild my life. One morning, as I walked to work through drizzle-soaked streets, I realized I had gone a full week without opening my old apartment's door. I hadn't needed to. I didn't want to confront the emptiness, the silent accusations of the walls, or the stacks of unpaid bills glaring at me like trophies of betrayal. Instead, I walked past, feeling a strange mix of grief and relief. I was losing that space, losing it completely, but in that loss I found an unexpected freedom. No longer tethered to the ruins of our life together, I could start to imagine something new, however fragile or uncertain. Financial reality remained a relentless companion. Calls from creditors arrived like clockwork, and I had to learn to speak calmly, firmly, even when panic clawed at my throat. Some creditors offered partial payments, others demanded full repayment immediately. I spent hours each day creating spreadsheets, prioritizing what could be saved, what could be deferred, what had to be sacrificed. Every decision felt like a gamble with my life itself. Sleep remained a scarce commodity, often stolen by anxiety or memories, but slowly, through sheer persistence, I began to gain a semblance of control. I learned that survival is often less about heroics and more about consistency, showing up, making small decisions, and refusing to be paralyzed by despair. Emotionally, I felt like a pendulum. Some moments I would glimpse a flicker of hope, a quiet sunrise, a kind word from a friend, a step forward in handling finances, and I would feel almost normal. Other moments, a text message, a commercial, a song on the radio would trigger the full weight of betrayal, and I would sink into tears that felt like they would never end. I learned to tolerate this oscillation, understanding that healing was not linear, that it could not be rushed, and that each tear, each moment of despair was part of the process. One evening, I allowed myself a small indulgence. A hot shower, my first since moving into the motel, and a walk to the nearby park. The wind was cold, but the damp air smelled like earth and rain, and for a few minutes I allowed myself to simply breathe. Children ran past, laughing, oblivious to heartbreak and loss. Couples walked hand in hand. For a moment I envied them, but I also envied myself for still being here, still standing despite everything. That small recognition, that I had endured what could have broken someone else, felt like a victory. I started noticing patterns in my grief. Loneliness was most acute in quiet moments, before sleep, before waking, during empty evenings. But the act of keeping busy, of creating routines, of focusing on tangible tasks, became a form of armor. I began to reclaim time that had previously been lost to worry, self-pity, or helplessness. Slowly, inch by inch, I was reclaiming my life. Letters continued to be my secret therapy. I wrote hundreds of pages of thoughts, memories, and reflections, pouring into them the fear, anger, and sorrow that I could not voice aloud. Sometimes I read them back aloud in the lonely motel room, listening to my own voice, shaking, raw, and undeniably human. Each word etched a small path forward, each sentence a thread stitching together the pieces of the person I had been with the person I was becoming. By the 5th week, the first tangible signs of progress appeared. I had set aside enough to apply for a small, modest apartment. It was far from luxurious, but it was mine. I negotiated a payment plan with one of the banks to keep my credit from sinking further. I even allowed myself a small indulgence. A plant for the motel windowsill, green and alive, a tiny defiance against the gray walls and stale air. Life was still hard, but I could feel a rhythm returning, a slow pulse of stability that hadn't existed since the night I first discovered the betrayal. The most profound shift, however, came quietly, almost imperceptibly. I began to recognize my own resilience, my capacity to endure, and the fact that my life, while fractured, was not over. The person I had been, trusting, loving, perhaps naive, was not lost but tempered, refined by fire. And the person I was becoming, vigilant, deliberate, cautious, yet still capable of joy, was someone I could begin to respect. Pain, I realized, had a strange duality. It destroyed, but it also revealed, honed, and ultimately strengthened. By the 6th week, the monotony of survival began to feel less suffocating and more like a framework. I had carved out routines. Wake early, shower, coffee from the vending machine, work, small errands, brief walks, and the ritual of writing in my notebooks before bed. It was not glamorous, nor did it erase the pain, but it provided structure in a life that had recently been shattered. I realized that survival isn't always dramatic. Often it's the quiet accumulation of small choices. Paying a bill, responding to a creditor, taking a shower, opening your eyes in the morning. One evening, I allowed myself to look back at my old apartment's pictures on my laptop. I hadn't visited it since I left, but the digital memories remained frozen and unchangeable. I scrolled slowly, feeling the sting of nostalgia and the sharp pang of betrayal. Each image, the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, reminded me of what had been lost. Yet even as I felt the ache, I noticed something else. A clarity that had been impossible before. The life I had shared, there was a story that ended. That ending, though painful, did not define the entirety of my existence. And for the first time, I could imagine a future that was truly mine, not borrowed or shared, not marred by deception. Financial work continued to dominate my days. I learned the nuances of negotiating payment plans, contacting creditors, and budgeting to the exact dollar. I kept spreadsheets, lists, and reminders. Every small victory, an overdue bill paid, a penalty waived, an email successfully sent, felt monumental. It was exhausting, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in months: agency. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life, watching as circumstances pushed me forward. I was actively shaping what remained of it, reclaiming power that had been stripped away. Amid the practicalities, I also began paying attention to the emotional landscape. Nights were still hardest, especially the quiet ones, but I learned coping mechanisms. Writing, long walks under the streetlights, calls to a friend who never judged or offered platitudes, just listened. I began to notice small shifts in myself. A surge of patience where I once felt only despair, a spark of creativity in my writing that had been dulled by betrayal, a cautious optimism that hadn't existed in months. I began to see grief not as a prison but as a guide. Painful, yes, but capable of teaching resilience, insight, and self-reliance. One rainy morning, I took a long walk through a nearby park. The rain was light, a mist rather than a downpour, and the world smelled of wet earth and growing things. Children splashed in puddles, couples held umbrellas close, and I realized that life had continued outside my pain. The world did not pause for grief, nor did it apologize for cruelty. And yet I was still here. I could move, breathe, see, and feel. I could rebuild. That realization, subtle but profound, became a cornerstone for the weeks to come. By the 7th week, I had found an apartment. A small one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old paint. It was modest, but it was mine. The act of signing the lease felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a declaration that I was no longer willing to exist in spaces tainted by betrayal. Moving in was exhausting, the boxes heavy, the furniture minimal, the walls bare. But each item placed felt like a reclamation of space, of identity. I spent hours unpacking, arranging, and organizing, transforming the empty apartment into a home that belonged only to me. A small bookshelf went in the corner, a plant by the window, a worn rug to soften the hardwood floors. Nothing extravagant, nothing pretentious. Just a space where I could exist without ghosts whispering through the walls. The first night in my new apartment, I lay in bed and felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Tentative, fragile, yes, but undeniably present. Emotionally, I began to explore new dimensions of myself. I realized that my trust, once broken, would never be blind again, but it could be measured, deliberate, and intentional. I started dreaming of work opportunities, creative projects, and small adventures that had once seemed impossible. My grief had taught me the depths of pain, but also the vast potential for growth. I was beginning to understand that survival was not just endurance. It was transformation. Letters continued to be my secret companion. I filled journal after journal with thoughts, reflections, anger, sorrow, and tentative hope. I began rereading old entries, amazed at the raw, unfiltered emotion I had poured out during the early weeks of despair. It struck me that the very act of documenting my experience had been a form of therapy, a bridge from chaos to clarity. Words, I realized, were not just escape, they were armor, map, and compass. By the 8th week, the combination of routines, small victories, and emotional work began to solidify into a rhythm that felt sustainable. I was not healed, healing was still a distant horizon, but I was functional, capable, and increasingly self-reliant. Nights were still challenging, especially when memories crept uninvited, but I now had tools. Reflection, writing, structure, and the knowledge that I could withstand more than I had ever imagined. And slowly, as the days passed, I began to imagine a future. Not a life dictated by loss or betrayal, but one I could shape with deliberate choices. A life where love, when it returned, would be measured, mutual, and respectful. A life where trust would be earned, not assumed. A life where my worth was no longer defined by someone else's inability to love me properly. For the first time since that shattering night, I allowed myself to hope. Hope, fragile and hesitant but real. It was not the reckless, naive hope I had once carried. It was tempered, deliberate, and resilient. And in that hope, I felt the faintest glimmer of a truth I had been too devastated to acknowledge. I would survive. I would rebuild. And one day, the life I created from the ruins of betrayal would be entirely my own. The weeks that followed were a mixture of labor and quiet revelation. My days were filled with mundane but essential tasks: grocery shopping, laundry, budgeting, making calls. But each act felt like a brick in the foundation of a new life. I had learned that survival wasn't about grand gestures. It was about consistency, about showing up even when the weight of despair threatened to crush me. Each completed chore, each small victory reminded me that I could endure, adapt, and rebuild. Evenings were still the hardest. Silence became both a friend and a tormentor. I would sit on the small balcony of my new apartment, listening to the hum of the city below, feeling the cool air against my skin and letting the memories come. Sometimes I wept quietly, the grief sharp and unrelenting. Other times I simply watched the sky darken, feeling the strange comfort of continuity, that life moved forward relentlessly whether I was ready or not. I began to understand that grief is not something you overcome. It is something you carry, slowly integrating it into the fabric of your being until it becomes a quiet companion rather than a raging storm. I started reconnecting more intentionally with friends and family. The initial hesitation, shame, pride, fear of pity, gave way to gratitude. People wanted to be there not to fix me but to witness me, to offer connection when I needed it most. I allowed myself to be seen, flawed and fragile, and discovered that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness. The bonds I had neglected, strained by life and betrayal, began to feel alive again. I realized that survival isn't just about self-reliance. It's about remembering that humans are not meant to endure alone. Financial stability remained an uphill climb. I negotiated more payment plans, found additional freelance work, and slowly began saving. The shadow of debt loomed, but it no longer paralyzed me. I was learning to take one step at a time, to prioritize, to balance necessity and self-care. Even small accomplishments, paying an overdue bill, receiving a paycheck without an overdraft warning, felt monumental, and each success chipped away at the anxiety that had once consumed me. Emotionally, I felt a subtle but profound shift. I was no longer the person who had first walked into that motel, broken and hollow. I had learned to tolerate discomfort, to endure emotional chaos, to navigate the daily grind without collapsing. I had reclaimed pieces of myself that had been buried under betrayal. Patience, strength, cautious optimism, and the understanding that my worth was not defined by anyone else's inability to love me. Each day I felt slightly more whole, slightly more prepared to face whatever came next. Writing remained my refuge. I filled journals with letters I would never send, reflections on my journey, fragments of dreams for the future. Reading these entries, I recognized my own resilience. I had endured what once seemed unendurable. I had faced despair without surrendering entirely. I had grieved, cried, raged, and now, slowly, incrementally, I was beginning to heal. And then one morning, I woke up and noticed something I hadn't felt in months. A faint, almost imperceptible sense of peace. Not a triumphant joy, not a reckless hope, but a quiet steadiness. The crushing weight of betrayal had lessened, not vanished, but tempered. I could think about the past without being consumed by it. I could plan for the future without feeling paralyzed by fear. I could exist in the present without constant panic. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, lingering grief, moments of doubt. But for the first time since that shattering night, I felt a sense of agency. I was no longer entirely defined by loss. I was not just surviving, I was beginning to live again. The apartment, modest and imperfect, symbolized more than shelter. It symbolized reclamation. I had walked away from betrayal, from a life built on lies, and had begun constructing something real, deliberate, and mine. Heartbreak, I realized, is both cruel and clarifying. It strips you bare, tests every fiber of your being, and forces you to confront truths you might rather ignore. But in the wreckage, there is a choice: to remain broken or to rebuild. I chose the latter. And though the journey was just beginning, though the scars would remain, I felt the first stirrings of a life reclaimed. I closed my journal that night, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting shadows across the room, and breathed deeply. The storm had passed, or at least shifted. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that I could emerge from the ruins not just intact but stronger, wiser, and more certain of my worth than ever before. And in that fragile, quiet hope, I understood the truth I had been searching for: that losing everything does not mean the end. Sometimes, it is the beginning of everything.